Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alan Joins, Mayor of Winston-Salem, and call to order this Committee of the Whole workshop for the Winston-Salem City Council, a workshop dealing with affordable housing. Pursuant to the policy and procedures adopted by the City Council relative to virtual meetings, I've determined that it's not feasible for the City Council and I to meet together physically, and due to the pandemic, all council members are participating virtually. If a roll call is needed today, council members will be recognized or raise your hand and state their vote. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Larson.
Present.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Mundy.
Present.
Councilmember Scipio.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Here.
Councilmember Burke.
Thank you all very much. This meeting is being televised live today on TV 13, and it will be replayed tomorrow at 9 a.m. and again Wednesday at 9 p.m. Copies of our agenda, as well as videos of previous meetings, are always available online at the city's website, and just click on the Watch Meetings Online option. Council members, thank you for making your time available today for an extraordinarily important discussion. As you know, we have placed the development of affordable housing as one of our top priorities that we identified during our strategic planning session. I want to thank Assistant City Manager Tony, as well as CD Director Newman, for their hard work in putting together this agenda and this meeting materials. You saw the book, huge amount of information for us. I also want to thank the presenters that are joining us today, Mitchell Silver, Tyler Mulligan, and Sarah Udia, for joining us today and sharing your insights about the issue of public housing. You know, the creation of 14,000, 15,000 affordable units is a challenge for Winston-Salem, challenge for any city, really. And as you know, it is a issue that's facing communities all across the United States. And they're coming up with different solutions and different ideas. And so today, I'm very excited that we are coming together as a council and a staff to hopefully get on the same page as we have issues of understanding of the issue, as well as potential options. At the conclusion of today's meeting, I hope to come back with a recommendation to the council for your consideration at a later date. I'm now going to ask our chairman of our Housing and General Government Committee, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, who's been a tireless advocate for affordable housing, to please challenge us today on what we want to accomplish. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome, members of the council and staff. We finally got to the housing summit. I'm so glad that we have now, ventured into this path. I know you're excited. I'm excited. But most importantly, the people are excited because what they've done, and they've watched us for the past several years of how quickly we can move to issues. I would like to reckon the moment to affordable care. It took a mountain of people to move it, to ensure that it was available to those that needed it and affordable. And we, as a city council, have to do the same thing. We got to move a mountain. But as the mayor said, I'm sure with all of us together, we can do this. Yes, you got a lot of information. I hope you all, like the teachers would say, did your homework, or to some degree to read some of it. But I look and I hope that each of us at the end of the day will understand how important our job is, and that we can no longer sit on the sideline, that we are preparing to give you the information and the tools that you need to be able to make a concerted decision as to where do we go from here, as you always say. So what do we do? And hopefully at the end of the day, we'll have something for you. Again, thank you. Thank you to the staff for putting all of this together in light of all the other things that have been going on. But I'm sure we're going to rise to the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So now I'm going to actually turn the agenda over to Marla Newman, and let her kind of run it from this point on, and then we'll come back together a little bit later on. Do have a lot of material to cover, a lot of issues to cover. We'll take some breaks along the way to let us stretch our legs, but I think if we can power through this, we can get on through it there. So, Ms. Newman, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Joines. Good afternoon, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the council, colleagues, and Mr. Silver. Thank you all for being here and for your interest in this important topic. I have the honor of introducing Mitchell Silver. Excuse the reference there. Mitchell is a principal with McAdams. It's a civil engineering, landscape architecture, and land planning company in Raleigh, North Carolina. There's a more detailed bio of Mr. Silver in your packet. I will say one of the things that's not mentioned in that bio is the fact that he is also the former planning director for the city of Raleigh. So just wanted to make sure we didn't miss the fact that he's actually done the labor here in North Carolina that we can all make reference to as time goes by. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mitchell Silver. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to make sure I have permission to share my screen. I do, and I will get started. As we always say in Zoom, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right. First, Mayor Joines and City Council and staff, it is a pleasure to present to you today. I'll be offering a planner's perspective. As was mentioned, I've read my bio. Yes, I served as Raleigh's planning director for about 10 years, but also served as president of the American Planning Association. So I'll be offering you a planner's perspective and why it is important to look at housing as a critical component to a livable city. I don't just look at affordable housing, but I look at affordable communities and livable communities. And so I'll present for probably about 30 minutes, and then I will be here to entertain your questions. So I can also say, knowing North Carolina quite well, I just returned from New York, that you should have full confidence in both your planning staff and community development staff. I go back as far as knowing Paul Norby, and I know Marla, so you have a good staff that will really help you find the right path forward. So as a planner, I always want to look at what does your plan say? There was a process back in 2013, adopted, I believe, in 2013, and it really was an effort to reach out to the community to find out what is the blueprint for Winston-Salem. I want to note, which is rare, that your legacy plan actually won a national award, and is serving as president. I can tell you that's not easy to do. So kudos to the city of Winston-Salem for achieving that milestone. But I wanted to understand, what are you saying about the future of your city and where does housing and neighborhoods fit in? And when I read it, like saying, wow, this may be an easy presentation to give, because your vision, which is still the plan on the books, is to have a more compact, balanced development pattern, to have livable neighborhoods. And in fact, your goal was to have higher development densities, mixed-use development, increased infill development, and more balanced growth. Those are very important. It's a very important vision and very important goals. The importance of this plan is that it's the public's plan. I've been to many jurisdictions where they said that was the past council that passed the plan. That's not our plan. A plan is a blueprint for growth, and it should transcend administrations to make sure the public, the elected officials, the business community understands what's the blueprint so they know where they're going as a community, and then staff can slowly start to implement that plan. And that is a great guide for decision making when you're contemplating actions, policies, and of course, zoning decisions. The plan should always have an annual report and be updated every 5 years or so. I understand that the city is now undergoing an update. That is important because you want to make sure the plan is current and addressing new trends. Just because you say 2030, as we know, the last couple of years has seen a lot of volatility, a lot of issues and pressure on affordable housing. So I applaud you for pursuing the action of updating your plan. But a plan also addresses uncertainty. So I read your plan. You have an excellent chapter on neighborhoods and towns. And you'll see in a second, if you hadn't read it in a while, what it says about your city. Clearly, there was a focus on quality and affordable housing communities, and not just affordable housing, and an action plan and implementation plan is key, which I'll address later in my presentation. So what does your plan say? Chapter 11, and these are all beautiful attributes, to have new and revitalized neighborhoods that offers a variety of quality housing types, that it ensures neighborhoods are inclusive of all races, ages, and income, ensure a variety of quality housing types for all income levels, allow accessory apartments, and foster a climate that is hospitable to affordable housing development. I have to tell you, those goals are unique, and I applaud you for taking that step, particularly the last one, because very often there's this tension between rental and home ownership. So when I saw that statement in your plan, I have to say this is a city that certainly is on the right track. But under Marla's leadership, you have the plan, but there was also an intense focus on housing. Marla and I talked quite a bit, and I was gratified to know that this council had identified affordable housing as a top priority as the city of Raleigh, where I currently live and work. There was that needs assessment in 2018. There were reports on vacancy and abandonment, on affordability and anti-displacement. All these are building to the effort of what you need to do going forward. And I'm just so impressed by how focused you are on really understanding not just the problem, but some of the solutions to address affordable housing in the future. I always like to take a step back and remind people of some of the emerging challenges we're facing here in the 21st century. Americans are getting older. Life expectancy now, we're going to see people over the age of 80 almost triple by 2050. More diversity, more people with disabilities, more multi-generational households, more single mothers, and fewer couples are getting married, which means there are fewer households. It is changing. You also see the majority of households by 2030 will be a single person, either a person who does not want to get married or a person who is a widower or a widow. The trends are changing, and we all know there'll be no majority race by 2045. So here's just a snapshot. A lot of people says we have to build different type of housing. Look at how the number of people, that sweet spot where people get married between 25 and 34 has dropped since the 1960s. It is now dropping precipitously, and people are waiting longer to get married or not getting married at all. So the household type we're looking for, where people fantasize about single family, is now starting to move away. Homes are getting smaller. COVID actually put a reset on that equation, where people were leaving larger cities looking for homes. But we believe in the long term, people will still look for smaller places or more compact living in urban centers. We start to look for planning for generations. Sadly, the greatest generation, now between 97 and 120, will no longer be with us in the next 10 to 15 years. And you see the breakdown of the silent, the boomer, X, Y, Z, and now the newest generation, the alpha generation. Why do I bring this up? Because cities need to understand who's living in their boundaries. In Winston-Salem, over 56% of your population are under 40. And we want to make sure we as decision makers, we that are doing the planning, understand that we have to think about the lifestyle choices of the next generation. And if you look across the board, your Gen Z population is close to 30%. That's close to a university town like Greenville, where you have East Carolina, that's at 38%. We want to make sure we understand their housing choices and their needs, and it's different than the needs we had for housing in our generation. So I gave Marla a copy of this presentation for all of you to take a closer look at, but it gives you a sense as you compare it to Raleigh, Greensboro, to the state and to the country where you fit in. But we have to understand that we have to take into account the generations that are living in our city. They have different needs, aspirations, and that we have to take them into account and not base decisions on our orientation of what housing choices we liked when we grew up. And that's very hard to do. So who rents? Young professionals, seniors, veterans, individuals or families or households who cannot afford, or in some cases, don't want the burden of buying a home. particularly seniors who want to be relieved from home maintenance, and they'd rather just have a lifestyle that's a lot easier, where they can walk to places and not drive. People with disabilities, based upon your report, the enterprise report, 12.5% of households in Winston-Salem are living with someone with a disability. That's a very unique housing choice than regular housing. Also, people who relocated to an area looking for a home. I just spoke at a conference in Texas, and they see single-family home rentals as one of their fastest growing markets. A couple of reasons. One, people prefer that lifestyle, but also they're waiting to see if they can buy a home. But it's not uncommon for people who are looking to rent and test out the city before they go ahead and decide to live there. And then the working class, employees who work in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. And you'll see in a second when we look at the income distribution, how many of your employees could actually afford to live in Winston-Salem or Forsyth County. So we want to make sure we have housing choices for all, and that is why I applaud the City Council for pursuing affordable housing as a priority. So let's take a deeper dive. I always like to differentiate between affordable housing, which is a program, and people who say, there's housing is there housing I can afford? There are two different messages. One is driven by the private market, and the other one is the private market, but is something where government can actually do something about, either through raising funds directly to build affordable housing, incentives, or programs. The latter about I want housing I can afford is a very, very difficult to achieve, because those are individual homeowners that are asking someone to buy their home, and in many cases, driving up home prices. And I'm sure you're experiencing that in Winston-Salem and in Forsyth County. Based upon your enterprise report, between 2017 and 2027, your report said that you would need 14,000 new housing units in Winston-Salem to meet the demand. That's between 2017 and 2027. Of these new units, that's both home ownership and rental, more than half, 62%, will be demanded by older adults between the ages of 65 and 84. When you look at younger adults, a significant share will go to them as well, between 25 and 44, and they're expected that more than half of the rentals, 59%, will be demanded by young adults. So I'm trying to make sure you understand, when you think about affordable housing, who is it for? Very often we have one demographic in mind, but based on this current slide, it is a broad demographic, and we want to make sure that this is a city that's welcoming to all and has housing choices for all. So here's some examples of some rental housing. I put this up because far too often people have an image of rental housing that looks more like this than like this. The quality of housing is changing. We want to make sure we have property managers that know how to screen and take care of property. And you have examples right now in Winston-Salem, the Enclave 2 community, 96 units with a variety of housing types, providing affordable housing options for residents who want to live and work in your community. And I encourage you to do more of this, because I can imagine that this is successful and how you can replicate this throughout the city. I also want to take a look at your home ownership versus your poverty rate. I was actually surprised when I looked at this chart. This is looking at the percent of the rate of home ownership in the top 12 cities of North Carolina. Winston-Salem, you're number 4. You're right behind High Point, Cary, and Concord. We all know Cary is a very affluent community, but their poverty rate is 4.8%. Winston-Salem is 20.7%. So while you rank 4th in home ownership, you rank 3rd in the highest poverty rate. That is not sustainable. There's a disconnect. And that's why you're probably hearing from your residents is that we can't live here because we're struggling to afford living here. So this is something that you should certainly take in mind. And so as you want to make sure that you start to balance your new housing units, because in terms of home ownership, you're at the top half of the state. So you want to make sure this is another incentive that you need to diversify your housing stock and look at that balance between single family homes and other multifamily options. Now, I took the liberty of doing what's called as a mortgage calculator that you can find online. I went to the census and broke down the incomes per household in Winston-Salem and asked a simple question. Based on these salaries, how much of a home can I afford? I made an assumption about how much debt the household's in and how much they can put down for a down payment. And as you look at this chart, based on the home prices in Winston-Salem, you'd have to wait until you have a household income of about $75,000 before you can purchase a home in Winston-Salem. Can you find a home under $150,000? Yes, they're rare, because I did look. But it's beginning to show you, based upon the income, what can I afford of the households in Winston-Salem, what can people afford? This is for home, not for rent, to buy a home. Now, if you have less debt, if you have more money to put down, these numbers can change, but wanted to put down the assumption so you understand exactly what people can afford. The problem with this chart is if I look at all the prices of new home construction in Forsyth County, only 83% of the residents who live in Winston-Salem can't afford these newly constructed homes, but potential buyers outside the area can. That is why when you start contemplating rezonings and new development, you have to start to balance to make sure that there are housing options for all and solely not rely on single family because of the trends that we are seeing. So again, this was eye-opening for me. And again, those new home prices, they're listed at $289. Once you go in and start signing a contract, it starts to escalate as you put in specialized items. So that's just the base price. So it's showing you, this was taken about 2 weeks ago from Zillow. So this is actually up to date and very current. So with some of the reality check is how some of the affordability challenges you're having in your county. So going back to your comprehensive plan, I wanted to take a look and comparing it to Raleigh, because I always like to compare one place to the other. What's the breakdown of your land uses in your city? Winston-Salem, in terms of residential uses, roughly 43% is residential. The majority is single family. In Raleigh is 44%, also the majority, but lesser so, about 34%. Looking at some of the other mixes, the charts didn't compare side by side exactly, but as you can see, there's more of a push in Raleigh for 6.5% of duplexes to make sure there's more housing diversity so that people can afford versus relying solely on single family. The industrial or the non-residential, Raleigh has a little bit more, and then we get to the agricultural open space. But the point I'm trying to make is land use translates to value as well as translates to housing options. In your plan, you actually took a leap forward to say, okay, this is how we plan to use our residential land use to provide housing options. The question is, are you following that plan? What has transpired since you adopted the plan? You certainly stated, and this chart comes directly from your future land use map, you want to decrease large lot residential land use by 34,000 acres. You want to increase low density residential land by 23,000 acres. Subdivisions, conservation subdivisions by 14,000, multifamily, 3,800 acres, and mixed use, 3,000 acres. Those were the decisions you made in the planning process. Now, clearly you can have more density on the 3,800 acres, but this is something as you move into the affordable housing space, you want to make sure you're following your plan, that you deliver on that promise to diversify your housing stock and see if you truly need 23,000 acres for solely low density residential. Those are decisions you have to make going forward. As you stated in your plan, you want to balance density with quality of life, but you also want to know how you plan land use to affect your tax base, because a stronger tax base means more cash to provide affordable housing and other options. So I'm going to transition right now quickly on the understanding the value of land. I have to share with you the slides I'm going to present was really a game changer in Raleigh and the community, because no one ever presented this information before. We all know that local government revenue comes from property taxes, sales tax, and what I call fees and fines. But land equals property tax revenue. Land is a finite resource. It's a commodity. And as I stated, we have to balance density with quality of life. The decisions you make on land use will affect your tax base. Let me give an example. It would take 600 single-family homes on 150 acres to equal the tax value of one of our high-rises in downtown Raleigh. 150 acres versus 1 acre, same tax value. In other words, what we're saying is, as we grow our city, you, the single-family homeowners, we want you to bear the burden of the taxes. That's not what we want. We want to make sure we upset it with non-residential, with more density, so that it makes sure that our land, our tax base remains stable. To put it another way, that one tower downtown has 90 times the tax value per acre as your average suburban acre. And so that's why you want to make sure as you plan your city, you have a balance of land uses, because you want to have those low density neighborhoods, but you also want to have those higher density places that help provide that quality of life that you want to pay for. Put it another way, that downtown high rise on a 3-acre site pays off its infrastructure in 3 years. The suburban multifamily complex on 30 acres, it'll take 42 years to pay off the same investment. So it's showing you land use decisions, rezonings matter. You have to make sure you balance it so it strengthens your tax base. To put it another way, on a per acre basis, a colleague of mine in Asheville has been doing this work for a number of years. He compared a Walmart to a downtown mixed-use building. One sits on 34 acres, the other one on a half acre. The Walmart generates on a per acre basis, $6,500, that small building, 10 times the amount. And in terms of jobs per acre, Walmart is 6, that small downtown building, it's 74. So it's letting you understand on a per acre basis, the decisions you make about what you're allowed to put on the property translates to a quality of life, but also translates to a tax base. So when I was in Raleigh, I shared this with the council. We wanted to explain on a per acre basis, what do we yield on an annual basis? The Walmart, about $2,000 per acre. Single family residential, $2,800. And you go down the list till you get to the bottom. A 6-story mixed-use building, or even a 3-4-story residential, it's 10 times the amount. Offer housing choices, but also helps the tax base. And larger buildings don't require the same level of schools and infrastructure. So having that balance is healthy for the city's bottom line, healthy for the tax base, but also healthy to balance those land uses. Here's another chart I used. I wanted to show on a per acre basis, using kind of a heat map, where is the tax base coming from? The darker the color, the more intense value that we're getting. But because I couldn't see the blues, I asked my staff to do it in 3 dimensions, and this is what they found. Can you tell me where downtown and midtown is located? Those downtown, midtown locations are helping support and offset the tax burden to all the low density areas. That's what happens when you think very differently about how you plan for land. And this is help you achieve your goal to have a balanced land use, balanced housing choices, and a strong tax base. So going back to my days in Raleigh, we took this whole concept and said, we're going to direct 60 to 70% of all of new growth in 8 growth centers and 12 multimodal corridors. That's where the growth is going to go. We'll protect the low density areas, and all the areas highlighted in brown is where you're going to see new growth, because we want to capture that tax base, provide housing choices so people can thrive and live in our community. We even mapped out where the places will be rezoned, so the public would not be surprised. These are the areas where expect the majority of rezonings to occur to higher densities. We're doing it because we want to provide housing choices, want to increase our tax base, and provide a more livable community. Sorry. We also took a hard look, and because of these presentations, Raleigh was able to transition in 2000, where only 40% of all of our units permitted were multifamily. By the time I left in about 2014, that went up to 73%. We strengthened our tax base. Now, young people who are graduating from NC State can stay in our community and have a career because they can afford to live here. Seniors who want to stay here or can't afford their home anymore can stay and live in one of those growth centers and walk to get their services. For us, it was very, very impactful. You see those trends lines over time of how single family starts declined and multifamily increased. And we were able to provide a very strong quality community. And so for us, we're very pleased about how that turned out. Let me now close on implementation. I did look at the comp plan. I noticed there was not an implementation chapter. I strongly encourage Winston-Salem to include an implementation section when they update the plan. It is very, very key. There are several ways you implement a comprehensive plan: policies, actions, the development code, and then capital projects. What we're able to do is we put an entire section about how we're going to implement the plan. Policy, actions, development codes, we laid them all out so that the public understood what our plan was going forward. And then we had a team in place to work with all the agencies to make sure the plan was executed. It was not the planning department's plan. It was the city's plan. It was the public's plan. We were just the agents to make sure it happened. So as I stated, we developed this implementation team. It was very clear about the plans and actions that will be executed. Each department had an annual work plan, so we knew exactly what they had to do year after year. We had cost estimates for the area plans and studies, so we can share with the budget office, a city manager's office, what items required capital improvement as deliberations occurred for the budget. And we had these annual reports to City Council, which I'll share with you in a second. This is what the matrix looked like. The specific items, the responsible agency, the time frame, and did it or did it not need capital funds. And then we met quarterly to make sure there was progress. And then at the end of the year, there was this report to City Council about emerging issues they had to pay attention to, policies or actions that were implemented. And then if there was some hesitancy about some of the items in the plan the council wasn't comfortable with or the public, we'd have a discussion about either adding some new ones or taking old ones out. But it kept the plan active and alive. The public liked it because they saw their investment in the planning process and the adoption, and they actually saw this plan being a living document that would adapt over time. So as I close, I'm going to go over some of the key takeaways. You have a great plan, and there's an excellent guide when evaluating zoning cases for consistency with the plan. There are implications for actions you take, but also implications for things that you don't take. You need to understand both. I would be cautious about reinventing the wheel. Your neighborhood and town's chapter is an absolutely strong guide to what you want to do going forward. I am very pleased and not surprised that affordable housing emerged as a key issue because that's embedded already in your plan. So I'm very pleased that you seem like a city that understands what it needs to do, and I'm confident you'll get it done. Certainly, as I stated, I would encourage you to create that implementation section and team to ensure the plan is carried out. Understand the value of land, which I share with you, and this is the hard part, but understand the difference between affordable housing and someone saying, I need housing I can afford. So with that, I'll stop now and entertain your questions. And again, I just want to applaud you for taking a brave step. Affordable housing in almost every city that I consult in is the #1 issue. So I will stop now, and then I'll see if you have any questions. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Silver, Mayor Pro Tem, and then Councilmember McIntosh?
Yes. Again, thank you, Mr. Silver, for providing that wonderful presentation to us and somehow letting us know, again, as I've said to the council, we're not alone. Everyone is now trying to figure out how you get it done. When you talked about the implementation piece, can you give me, the council, some examples, one or two, that you would like to have seen if we had had the implementation piece in our plan?
That is a good question. There is a section, as I stated, where you talked about the existing land use and going to the future of what the land use is. I would have dived in a bit more to try to tie that specifically to locations. I think if the public is expecting land to change, they want to know where that's going to happen. There is a land use map, future land use map in the document. I would have coded it differently, and then I would have worked with the planning department and the planning commission to go case by case to make sure those are consistent. I'm not sure how that unfolded because I didn't do that level of analysis, but certainly that'd be one piece. You want to make sure you provided diverse housing. I would like to see a clear path forward of how you measure that and accomplish that so that the public, the planning commission, the development community know exactly where that's going to happen. The worst thing to do is when someone doesn't know the rules of the game, they go in to do something and say, I'd like to do X, can you advise me? And if I say, I don't know, because the rules change for each case. So I think, number one, understanding where that change is going to occur, make sure the planning department, planning commission, city council understand where that's going to occur, the residents understand, and the development community understands. So to me, that's one thing we focused on, and I shared that map with you, everything in pink, that growth framework map. And we made sure as we implemented, we stayed very focused on that map. And we had an annual checkup to council to see, this is how well we did this year. This is the cases that came in. This is what you've done. We are moving forward to implement the plan we put forth and adopted. I see notes about presentation mode. I apologize. I thought you were just seeing the presentation, and hopefully you did see the slides and not just me.
Mr. McIntosh?
Just on that point, can we get a copy of those? I know I'm going to get requests to see the slides. Beyond that, I wanted to say thank you. It was a very educational presentation, and I appreciate the recognition of the work that our City County Planning Board did the last time around. And I was involved in that. It was before I was elected, but it was a serious effort, and I think the fact that it was recognized nationally really says an awful lot. I guess my question to you is, I serve on the League of Municipalities board, and from dealing with council members from Raleigh, I know some pretty great strides have been made in Raleigh, although Raleigh is facing a much more rapid uptick in demand than we are. But what steps would you say Raleigh has taken that have been the most effective to allow the increase of supply to happen?
Well, I did leave Raleigh for a while. Thank you for your question. I did leave Raleigh for a while, but they're now pursuing affordable housing bond. They're working to make sure that affordable housing, like you, is a major priority. I think also they understand the importance of increasing density. And every discussion and consistency with the plan is debated and followed. If it's and we coded for what we wanted to see. We didn't make it difficult. If we said we wanted density here, we didn't punish people and make it difficult to do it. We made the things we wanted to see easy to do and the things we did not want to see hard to do. And we did that by communicating very clearly in the future land use plan and all of our planning documents. And I think that was key. It gave both the community the certainty that this is where we expect density to occur. It told the development community this is where we expect the density to occur. Where there was tension and friction is if you're recommending something which we did not anticipate. And it's a surprise to everyone. So I think I kind of generalize and say that there are plan-making cities and deal-making cities. Most developers prefer to be in plan-making cities because it's predictable to all the parties involved. When is a deal-making situation? Someone says, I have no idea what's going to happen. That creates uncertainty and frustration on all sides. So I think what Raleigh did right was they followed the plan. They focused on areas where they wanted to see increased density. They're focused on affordable housing by increasing density, but also the affordable housing bond. So, and working, of course, with affordable housing providers, the same as you're doing, because I spoke to Marley, already doing that as well. So those are some of the things that I'm very proud of that they were able to do. What no one expected was the bump in COVID and how that just upset the market, not all over the South and the West. That was a major disruptor. and I'm not sure when that's going to stabilize, but it just put housing prices through the roof, which is exacerbating an already problematic affordable housing market.
Thank you. Councilmember Scipio, then Councilmember Mundy.
Thank you, Mr. Silver. One quick question. Were you on the National Leagues of Cities presentation about a year ago about the parks in New York City?
Yes, council member, that was me.
That was wonderful. I love those ideas and what happened in those urban parks. It was just wonderful. So I'm very happy to see this presentation. I struggle with affordable housing versus housing I can afford. And how do we deal with that? Because we could get houses built, whether they're multifamily, rental, homeowners, whatever. But if people's incomes haven't increased, aren't we maintaining a poverty level by just not increasing the income? If we focus so much on having housing that people can't afford, are we saying we want to have subsidized housing throughout the city so that it could be housing they can afford? So I'm struggling with trying to understand when we say affordable housing. Are we really saying housing for all incomes? Some of it might be subsidized. Some of it might be duplex to bring or multiplex to bring the cost of construction down. How should we be looking at this? Because in our qualified census tracts, they're primarily on the east side of our town, mostly Black and brown neighborhoods. So if we look at them differently than the west side, are we not continuing to support the growth of poverty as well as segregated neighborhoods?
Councilmember Scipio, that is a great question. And that is why I wanted to differentiate affordable housing versus housing I could afford. I always ask the person, what are you talking about? There are people say, I want to live downtown, but I can't afford to buy there. That's not affordable housing. It is specifically a program, whether it's direct funding, subsidies, it's named it's a housing type. And very often people get confused between affordable housing and housing I could afford. Housing I could afford is very difficult to solve because it's driven by individual property owners who are selling their home on the market, and everyone wants to get top dollar. They don't realize the cumulative effect is that you're driving prices up for everyone. And so the supply and demand becomes the issue. That one's very difficult to do. Affordable housing, a program, and when you say raise income levels, you're always going to have the stratification of that chart I showed you. Even though some that are in the 30,000 move up to 70, there are others coming up that are going to be in the lower end. So that is why you have to make sure you provide affordable options for all people, including housing I could afford and affordable housing. Otherwise, you're penalizing people because of the income. Now, I don't know the salaries in Winston-Salem or Forsyth County, but I can tell you in that band are people who work for you, who right now cannot afford a new home in Forsyth County. That is where affordable housing program comes in. And I want to live in Forsyth County. I don't want to drive 2 counties over where I can find something I could afford. So what you're saying is a true problem. The problem with wealth generation is that this is a generational problem that will take generations to catch up. There's no quick fix. We all know what had happened in the past was that wealth was not created in certain communities, and that created a divide. There is no quick fix for that, but the fact that you recognize people need quality homes and quality places to live is a good start, but your answer is a good one. It's just there is no easy solution, but you can't hold people off from affordable housing because some people have anxiety about that term and anxiety about having community with too much housing that is affordable.
Thank you. Councilmember Mundy, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Silver, for this presentation. My question is very, very much riding on the coattails of Councilmember Scipio's, and that when I think about where there's some potential for for new development that is in those communities where there are a lot of Black and brown folks living. How do we balance between creating new housing opportunities and being criticized, and sometimes rightly so, for gentrification?
Another good question. I have learned in my life, if a community is underdeveloped, underserved, if you do nothing, you're accused of neglect. If you do something, you're accused of gentrification. You're in a bad place. People want to do the right thing. And I have found throughout my career, here's a community that's underserved, including parks, that we're going to go in, you've been underserved for years. And the minute we say, here comes something, saying, wait, don't improve it. If you improve it, we'll get pushed out. So like I said, that is a value decision that you have to work with the community. You have to ensure as you go forward that there is a mixed income option so you can help diversify the location. But you have to realize either you choose neglect or the fear of gentrification, and work with the community to understand these dynamics are in play. We want to do something. We recognize it's underserved, but if we do something, you can't come back and say, thank you for finally seeing that we've been neglected. Now don't do it because you're going to gentrify us. So that is a very delicate balance to walk. And I just go into that process with your eyes wide open and be honest and work with the community about how do you provide mixed income options and focus very clearly on how land is acquired so that people don't feel like they're being displaced. So that's the best answer I can give you, but that is walking a tightrope, and it's something I hear all the time. You do nothing, you're neglecting me. You do something, you're gentrifying me. Those are some very hard choices, in some cases false choices, but there is a path going forward where you actually can help uplift the community, provide options, and not see people displaced.
Thank you for that. Mr. Clark?
You're on mute.
You're muted, Robert. There you go.
For some reason, he's still on mute.
Excellent.
You're still on mute, Robert. There you go.
What's that?
I can
Got you now. Go ahead.
Okay. For the third time, I thought your presentation was very good, and I also thought the book that we got was done very well as well. I thought your presentation dealt mostly with density issues, and less so much with affordability. We certainly love to put up office buildings. We have all we need for right now, given that COVID has eliminated the need for office buildings. But you take a mixed-use building that has maybe a bank on the first floor, second floor's got some dentist office, and the next floors above have nice apartments. They're very, very expensive, and that's why you get that nice tax base. But I just got a couple of questions and comments as far as affordability. I think the word that we forget oftentimes when we mention affordability is the fact that it does require some subsidization, both in the capital of building it and the maintenance going forward. And what I struggle with is, how do we get the best value for the dollar? Is it better to do X versus Y? Right now, we're tearing down hundreds of old dilapidated apartments that were built in the 60s because the rents did not provide enough money to keep them up, and we're building nice new ones. We're building some through a program we're doing, and we have a local church in town that's doing quite a few. But how do we ensure that we get the best value? I struggle with that. The second one was, in many parts of our town, the cost to put a home up is greater than the value that you create when you finish. We have this problem particularly, and this is mentioned in the book. Y'all had a good name for it. I can't remember what it was, but in certain parts of town, you can spend $100,000 or $220 to build a house, and it's worth $80 when it's finished. And that's just because that's what the market says. I mentioned that in that the city has hundreds of little lots that we own that are in our unofficial land bank. And the maps we were also given showed dozens and hundreds of little vacant and abandoned places that are probably lots as well that we could get for nothing. But I'm not sure they have any value to anybody because it costs so much. They're only good for a single family, yet you got to have a tremendous subsidy to put a single family on them. And what I've seen, and I'm certainly not authority on this side of town, but Habitat can go in and do that because they have a huge subsidy on the houses they build. Anyway, your comments on those. And the last one is, and I've struggled with this. I have they're younger children, they're in their 30s, but I saw in the presentation that y'all assume 30% of income for housing. And I will tell you, none of my kids did that. They all bought houses. Now, some bought in big cities. They did not have cars, which saved them some money. But I would say all three of my kids at one time were paying half their income for housing. And I think if you go back to your chart that showed who could afford housing, if you added it up, it only came up to about 35%, but 53% of the people in this town own their homes.
Right.
So I just think if you want to be realistic, if particularly younger folks want to own a place, they're going to have to somehow budget a lot more than 30%.
Yes.
And hopefully grow into it. Anyway, those are my thoughts, and I'll hush and let you comment.
So the 53% number, that's over time. So that's a trend over time. It's not a point, it's a trend over time. So when homes were cheaper and people were able to afford, I think now circumstances are changing. North Carolina is a hot market in general. So that's just a number overall. In terms of value, it is a very difficult one. There's no question to provide affordable housing is going to require a subsidy. The cost of construction, that's just where it is. The fact that you have to redo an apartment building, some buildings have a 50-year life cycle, depends how it was built and how it's used. But in some cases, that does not surprise me. But it's very difficult to say best value. What I have seen that projects that do well understand they build to last, but that comes with the cost. They make sure they have proper property management so that the property is maintained. And like I said, there are, Texas right now is leading the way about how do we build and maintain multifamily the right way, and they have it down to a science. So to me, in part, to do affordable housing, it's going to require a subsidy. Most of it is going to be multifamily. There are places, community development departments, that will do single family affordable housing. It does require subsidy as well. So to answer your question, to provide us affordable housing at the prices of construction today is going to require subsidy. That is just the nature of the business. But I also encourage to build quality construction so it is built to last, so that you don't have these issues with maintenance as time goes on.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh?
A couple of quick questions. I'm not sure the answers are going to be quick, but the questions will be. We've been talking about the need to subsidize. Do you have a rule of thumb, or can you give us an idea of what you think needs to be spent per unit?
I do not. I mean, when I was plan director and I was knee deep in it, I knew at that time it was $150,000, I think, to build per unit. And so I don't require what the subsidy was. So I'm cautious to answer that question. I'm a planning expert, not a housing expert. So I'm sure there'll be other experts you can hear from that may answer that question. So I don't know what that magic number is. But I do know, for example, if it's, I don't want to get into it because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, then we could spend all afternoon on it.
That's, but there's no question that it does require substantial subsidy to bring a house, for example, is very, very expensive when people prefer that option versus multifamily.
Sure. Let me ask another question about holding periods. So throughout our research here, we've got several recommendations on how long we should make a home buyer commit to their property remaining affordable. And I guess my question is, how do you balance allowing people to build wealth with making them keep their home as quote unquote affordable, which to me says you can't sell it for more than you have in it? Because if we're going to do that, then people may as well rent.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I'm not sure I have the answer either. I do know you're exploring land banking, which is one way of keeping homes affordable, but I don't know how that translates to wealth accumulation over time. So that is another good question. Councilman, I can see why you were very active on the planning board. Great questions, and I don't have the answer for it.
One last quick one is, how do you deal with the negativity from let's just call them the NIMBYs, the groups. I mean, is there a playbook for that? I know everybody deals with it in their community, but it seems like sometimes we're just fighting battles we don't need to fight.
Yeah, no, this is one I can answer. Number one, your plan said it, is to basically take the stigma away. And people have to understand, when I usually ask a question when I go to a meeting, how many people ever rented in their life? And more than half the people raise their hand. I'm saying, wait, turn around. Because when you hear rental housing coming, there's a very different reaction. I think we default to something in our imagination, which is why I share with you who's a renter today. And within that band is people who work for the city of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. So I think you have to demystify people's perception of housing. I think that's one. Number two, you're a city that's looking for housing for all. There are people who work in your offices and clean your hotels. So I think as you start to communicate, that's number one. Number two, the value of land that I share with you. People have to understand that you have to balance out your tax base so that you're healthy and strong and you can provide the services that you want every day. So a city is a system and it's built on land, and that land generates value. You want this to be a great city. And I believe that every neighborhood, you're as strong as your weakest neighborhood, and that you rise and fall as a city, and you want all neighborhoods to be strong. We're all in this together. So I think as you have those conversations, and when people say no, they're saying yes to something else. When I was in Raleigh, there was no to rentals. I'm saying, were you saying yes, young people and seniors, we don't want you to live in our city? Are we really saying that? So I think what it is that you have to kind of take a step back, hear what people's concerns are, hopefully appeal to their logic, but to say that we are a city that wants to be welcoming to everyone, offer choices so that people can grow regardless of your income and love this place.
Thank you. Mr. Larson had a question?
Thank you, Mayor. This sort of follows up on Councilmember McIntosh's question, in that we all agree that affordable housing is going to require some subsidy of some sort to allow people to get into it. And it's usually hinged in part on income generated by the occupant, what median average income is and where they fall on that spectrum. One of the questions I sort of have, and maybe you've addressed this in other places, is if you put somebody in an apartment or you put somebody in a house, either owner occupied or rented, at a certain economic level to meet the requirements of affordable housing thresholds, and they improve their situation over time, earning more income, are we displacing them? Is that what happens? They have to move out of that unit?
Marlon may know to answer that question. Again, I'm not sure how the affordable housing program works. I do in most places. I believe it might have been Councilmember McIntosh about how long should a home be affordable. Maybe it was Councilmember Mundy. How long should a home be affordable? Most places I work, they prefer it to be in perpetuity rather than expire in 20 years and it goes on the market. But you have another question. I don't know what happens. My assumption is if your income rises, you may have to leave because you're making room to someone who needs that support. That would be my guess. But I don't know how it's handled in the affordable housing program. But my guess is if you're no longer income qualified, you need to make room for someone who does qualify. Is that correct, Marla?
Only for what are called income restricted units. And those are generally in multifamily developments. Anything single family, again, unless there is a restricted covenant that requires annual certification of income. So let's just say, let's use a single family home ownership unit for an example. You buy that, yes, you qualified at the time of purchase to get assistance with that purchase, but as your income increases over time, that's just to your benefit. There's no penalty, you don't have to sell, you don't have to move. Same thing with a lot of affordable developments. So there's a difference between what is an affordable development as opposed to a development that may have income restricted units. And so when you look at some of the developments that we've invested in that have workforce housing units, okay, that's for somebody who fits a certain income level. Once that income is exceeded, then yes, those particular workforce development units have to be relinquished. And it's the same thing with affordable units that are in fact income restricted. So there is a distinction, but generally speaking, people don't have to be uprooted as they improve their status in life.
Thank you, Marla. Ms. Silver, thank you so much. This was a very, very helpful beginning of our workshop. Set the stage for us. Great information, and we thank you for sharing that with us. Council members, we are just a couple minutes ahead of schedule. I'm going to say let's go ahead and take our 5-minute break right now. We'll come back at 5:05. Marla, if you could have our next presenters teed up at that time. Take a 5-minute break. Members, I'll call us back to order, please. Is everybody ready?
Ready?
Mayor Pro Tem, you had asked to be recognized right before we broke. Do you still need to make a comment, or I'm sorry if you were going to ask the question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll now move to the next phase of our presentations, which is the Affordable Housing Toolkit. Ms. Newman, you want to tee this one up for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mayor Joines. And they've made it easy for us because I was going to introduce Tyler Mulligan as Professor of Public Law and Government. And he's the director of the Development Finance Institute at the School of Government, as well as Sarah Odio, the assistant director of the Development Finance Initiative. And I'm sorry, I said institute earlier, the Development Finance Initiative. So again, their brief bios are in your notebook. And so I will turn it over to Tyler and we'll get started. Thank you. Tyler?
All right, thank you, Marla, and hello, everyone. There are several familiar faces in this meeting. It's good to see you again. The most important takeaway from this particular slide is that Sarah and I work for the School of Government. And the reason that's important is that we aim to uphold that value that the school holds of policy neutrality. Our goal is to provide you with actionable information and options. We're not here to advocate for one policy or another. We're here to share the legal and financial and development implications of the affordable housing context in Winston-Salem. The goal is to make it so you can make decisions and share those decisions with your staff and execute your strategic policy. So hopefully this session will illuminate all that. I should say, for anyone who's, you all have experienced speaking on Zoom, you know that it's complete silence on my end. And so if I say a really funny joke, feel free to unmute and laugh at it. I'm kidding. But if you do want to interrupt and ask a question, feel free to unmute and simply ask the question directly. I'll try to monitor chat, Sarah, and I'll try to look at it, but I assume you're going to want to unmute and talk. I want to let you know that's okay at any point. All right, so how are we going to do this in our short period of time that we have with you here today? We're going to first talk about affordable housing approaches generally. I want to give you some strategic framework for your thinking around affordable housing so that you can talk to your staff and amongst each other and set a strategy that makes sense in the larger context of affordable housing. We'll talk about what is meant by affordable housing. That word gets thrown around a lot, and I want to narrow down some specifics. It's of course necessary to talk generally about affordable housing, but we'll want to get into some of the specifics. We'll go into strategic thinking and tools that you can use to support privately owned affordable housing. This is not talking about what the housing authority does. This is all about privately owned affordable housing in our short segment today. And we'll dive down. We'll give you a general framework, and then we'll dive down into what we call supply side approaches, where we look at leveraging tax credits for mixed income projects. And we'll look at the specific Winston-Salem housing supply needs and approaches that can be used to address those supply needs. And then hopefully we'll have a little time for Q&A at your discretion, of course. Any questions about how we're proceeding? Okay, well, great. So this little word cloud is just a few of the words you may have heard bandied about when talking about affordable housing. We use all these words in different contexts. There might even be some missing, like I've heard essential housing or essential infrastructure as a term that's used for affordable housing. In this session, we want to get past these words. Sure, these are all ways we communicate about what we mean when we say affordable housing, and it's appropriate to use more sweeping or general terms when talking publicly. But when we get down to brass tacks and you're trying to give specific guidance to your staff in order to carry out an effective and complete affordable housing strategy, you're going to want to use more precise terms. And so I want to discuss those with you today and make sure you've got that common language that you can use with each other and with your staff. So get everyone on the same page on that basis. So the first thing is that affordable housing, affordable means not cost burdened. And so cost burden has a specific definition, and that is that you're cost burdened, you are cost burdened if you spend more than 30% of your gross income on housing. Doesn't ask what your income level is, it just says you are cost burdened if you spend more than 30% of your gross income on housing. And you are severely cost burdened if you spend more than half of your income on housing. What is included in housing costs? Well, there's specific data, there's specific definitions as well. This is in the federal data that's provided on housing costs. And for renters, it includes rent plus utilities. And for owners, it's a whole slew of things: mortgage, utilities, HOA, tax, and insurance. As you think about your constituents, there may be costs that you associate with housing that are not included in there. The ones that are raised to me most often are things such as broadband. It's not included in this list, or transportation costs. Depending on how far away you live from job centers, there might be costs associated with transportation with a particular housing location. Those costs, transportation, broadband, not included in the federal data. So it's not considered. I want to help you understand the limitations of the data. This screen has a lot going on, so I'm gonna go tackle it a little bit at a time. This is a North Carolina Housing Coalition Forsyth County profile. This is the county. Sarah, my colleague, will go into more detail in city of Winston-Salem data later. But for now, I'm just going to use this very helpful infographic on Forsyth County. And so we start at the top where it says when I ask who is cost burdened, it's answered with 46% of renters have difficulty affording their homes. And what that means is they are cost burdened. They're at least spending at least 30% of their income on housing. And then you can see on the home ownership side, 19% of homeowners are cost burdened and spending at least 30% of their income on housing. So these are just the general terms. This doesn't talk about what's severely cost burdened, and it does not break it down by income. It's just in the two categories of renter or homeowner. You can see there's a pretty stark difference there. Now, which workers are cost burdened? And so now this is where you take that cost burden figure and you take a look at, well, what are folks making and what are they spending on housing? And so we'll start with the red box at the bottom. It's the first term is the area median income. So $68,900 is the area median income for the county. I recognize it's not the city, it's the county. And what the area median income means is 50% of all incomes are below that point and 50% of all incomes are above that point. So this is the median income. And we call that 100% of the area median income. You'll see why I have to go through these definitions. It gets confusing pretty quickly. Take a look at the yellow or the orange boxes that just appeared where teacher and police officer are. So a teacher does not earn 100% of the area median income. A teacher earns 70% of the area median income. And a police officer in the county earns 64% of the area median income. And then there's some other, average annual salaries provided here, and you can see they go down, and I place them in yellow, and they include construction, healthcare, retail sales, childcare, and food prep and service. These are all workers, and they make a lower percentage of the area median income. So your authority is actually tied to the area median income of the people you're trying to work with. And I have a question here. Is $68,900 the household income or the individual income? I believe that is the household income. So thank you. And Sarah, I don't know if you'll probably clarify for the Winston-Salem data that we'll provide whether you're going to be using household or individual income. but your authority to act is tied to the area median income that you're trying to help. And so your authority starts always in the Constitution. We always start with the North Carolina Constitution, and you have the ability to aid the poor. That's the Constitution actually says to provide aid for the poor, the orphan, and the widow. But you have authority to aid the poor through your constitutional authority. And you can also aid moderate income persons as an add-on when you have the same purpose in mind as helping low income people. How does this translate into the statutes? Well, the statutes try to parallel that thinking by having a distinction about low income persons who earn 60% area median income or below, and moderate income persons, which is reasonably set at 80% of area median income and below. And so you can see I've color coded these to try to show you where different workers are, right? So low income workers in yellow earning less than 60% of area median income are all those that are in the yellow boxes on the left: construction, healthcare, retail, sales, etc. Whereas moderate income are your teachers and police officers. They're earning less than 80%, but more than that 60% area median income. And so the teacher and police officer are moderate income, and the other workers listed here are low income. Now let's see here. The income that is needed to afford a 2-bedroom apartment is the 48% of area median income, or $33,000. So to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, you've got to be making 33% or 48% of AMI. And you can see that on that left side with all those yellow boxes, only construction workers make 48% of area median income. And so the others would be cost burden for the typical 2-bedroom apartment. And so this is how we talk about affordable housing. These are the terms that we use. And so wanted to give you that general overview. But housing cost is not the only thing we need to look at. We'll also be taking a look at availability of housing. And what I mean by that is, do you have a mix? Do you have some small apartments, efficiencies for single people? Do you have some family apartments with multiple bedrooms? Do you have duplexes? Do you have quadplexes? Do you have single family homes, or do you have a mix of multifamily? So the mix of housing actually matters, because families are in different stages of life and have different housing needs. And so understanding what your population needs and what your housing stock availability actually is an important question. Adequacy, of course. How old is the housing? When was it created? Has it been rehabbed? Well, how about accessibility? Seniors, as you have an increasing population of seniors, they're going to need accessible housing. Do you have accessible housing in your community? That's one of the questions to ask. And then finally, eviction rates. Evictions create a lot of uncertainty in a person's life and makes it difficult for them to be good workers. And so eviction rates are something to look at as well. How is your rental housing treated? Is there a lot of evictions? And so now, trying to move our quick clip here to keep us going, let's get into the strategies or strategic thinking for affordable housing. And the way I'm going to approach strategic thinking is, first, we'll talk about tools based on the strategic emphasis, and that'll make sense in a moment. We'll talk about the difference between asset building or having ongoing affordability and how that affects your resources as a city. And we'll talk about leveraging with tax credits. So I'll start with the tools by strategic emphasis. And this handout has already been provided to you. It basically puts the 4 strategic areas of affordable housing into 4 quadrants. And the top half of those quadrants are preservation. And I distinguish between preserving housing in low growth areas or high growth areas. And the bottom half, the 2 bottom quadrants, are for production of affordable housing. And I split in demand side and supply side. Don't worry, I'll go into each of these. So first, we'll start with preservation. And I make a distinction between low growth and high growth. So the question I ask here is, why isn't all affordable housing preserved by the market in distressed or low growth areas. And so if you think about some of your low growth or distressed areas, why doesn't the private market preserve that housing as low income housing? And you're welcome to answer if you wish, or it can be a hypothetical question. That's okay too. All I can answer, and that is that in distressed areas, capital is just not forthcoming. In distressed or low growth areas, the banks, lenders, developers are just not interested in making the investments necessary. And frankly, if it's homeowners, they might not be interested in making investments in a low growth area because they're unlikely to see returns on their investments. So in a low growth area, you can understand why preservation of existing affordable housing might be a challenge because there's just no capital going into preserving it. The problem is a little different in a high growth area. In a high growth area, the reason the market doesn't preserve the housing is because the market wants to take that affordable housing and convert it to market rate housing. And so in those areas, it's a different problem entirely. There's plenty of capital. It's just not preserving that housing as affordable. It's converting it to market rate. And the tools that you need to use are different depending on which situation we have. In a low growth area, we have the major tool is code enforcement. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I've already spoken to you about code enforcement. Came there a couple of years ago with Center for Community Progress, and we talked about equitable and efficient code enforcement. But in general, just to quickly remind you, use code enforcement in a low growth area. And when an owner is not taking care of their housing, they have an obligation to do so. You use code enforcement. You can place a lien on their property for them after you've repaired it or kept up the grass mowing or whatever it is. And then you can foreclose. And when you foreclose on that property, you can choose to bid on it or not. You can, if you choose to not bid on it, then the market will take care of itself. Somebody will bid on it and take that housing and do whatever they wish with it. But if it's a priority area for you, you might consider bidding on the property on which you're foreclosing and taking that property and conveying it into a land bank. And a land bank is essentially an organization or program that takes property in some of these low growth areas that may have vacant or distressed properties, manages the properties that are under the control of the land bank, and then slowly conveys those properties out as the market is able to absorb them, keeping some of that affordable, trying to increase the values in the neighborhood and accomplish revitalization goals. So that's what you can do. One tool in low growth area. If you're dealing with low income owners, then there are programs already in existence and you probably already have them working, which is weatherization and energy efficiency, again, for low income owners, or rehab and repair programs to allow for low income owners to have a decent, safe place to live, even if they're in a distressed or low growth area where capital just is not forthcoming. And they might not be able to get that line of credit that they might need to make repairs or improve their house. In a high growth area, it's a different strategy. So we still might take a look at what the inventory is of city-owned housing, but we consider conveying that property to a land trust. A land trust is, again, an organization. It's different than a land bank. A land trust holds housing in trust and ensures that it remains affordable for perpetuity or into the distant future. That's the role of a land trust. And in a high growth area, that's a concern because the market wants to convert affordable housing to market rate. Another strategy you can take in a high growth area is to identify where you have existing low income housing tax credit projects that were 30 years ago subsidized through historic or low income housing tax credits, or LIHTC. We'll say LIHTC a lot, and I will use that acronym because it's a mouthful. But where that LIHTC is now expiring, and that housing, usually apartment buildings, is ready to be converted to market rate by the market. There's capital ready to do that. You might consider a strategy where you acquire those LIHTC projects and preserve them as affordable in a high growth area before it gets converted to market rate. And if you're dealing with homeowners, low income homeowners, part of the challenge that they have is maintaining their homes as the neighborhoods continue to improve. And so they need rehab and repair loans, or so that they don't lose their housing as their expenses may go up, or maybe even their property taxes go up. They may need emergency mortgage assistance, so they don't lose their home in a time of emergency. And also, we've seen in some high growth areas, we've seen owner education be effective, where will clinics are provided so that elderly folks who have their homes can pass them on to their children and allow that the homes to be maintained as affordable over time. Those are your preservation goals. Now we'll go into production real quickly. And production is where we're trying to create new housing. And there's demand side, which is where you're putting money in the hands of the consumer, the renter or the buyer of housing. And so if we put money in the hands of a renter through, for example, rental vouchers, such as Section 8, what happens is now that renter has enough income or enough voucher money to be able to go out to the market, and the market can feasibly provide housing for that voucher holder. And so the idea is that with holding the voucher in their hand, the market will respond and provide more supply of housing that the voucher holder is demanding. That's only available for low-income people. For home ownership, we would do the same thing, but we're doing it for homeowners. We're either providing housing counseling and credit repair so that there are more buyers out there who may have problems with their credit, but they repair their credit so they become eligible to buy housing, and so you have more demand for it. You might have down payment loan programs, again, helping those who might not have enough for a down payment, but could qualify for a mortgage if they could get a hold of their down payment. That creates more demand, and the idea is that the market will respond by increasing supply. And then finally, if you have city-owned property that's appropriate, you could convey it directly to low and moderate income buyers. That's the demand side, where you're dealing with the consumer or buyer of housing. On the supply side, where we'll spend more time, because this is typically where city councils spend a lot of their time, where the developers are working, where you're dealing with the supply of housing. You're trying to affect how much housing is produced by the development community. So for multifamily rental, one thing you can do is support LIHTC development. And we'll explain the difference between a 4% and 9%. I'm not going to go into that right now.
Tyler.
But yeah, Marla.
This is Dee Dee.
Oh, sorry, Dee Dee. Hi, Dee Dee.
Hi. One of the things I think we struggle with, just like all cities, is the understanding that some of us knew, and I took enough classes under you, we knew that the pendulum was swinging away from people owner-occupied housing, single infrastructure built houses, that people were starting to go to, they don't want to own. They want to rent. Like you said, they don't want the responsibility of cutting grass and plumbing. Can you just kind of dwell on that a little bit about how multifamily rental is basically the go-to infrastructure in cities now versus trying to build individual houses, the most bang for the buck?
Yeah, it's a great distinction you've made, Dee Dee. And what I'll say is this: the need for rental housing exists not just because there are preferences among younger professionals for rental housing, but also because the market right now is sort of requiring it. Young professionals are having trouble saving enough for a down payment at the same time as rents are going up, at the same time as single family home ownership prices are going up. And so rental stock may be necessary in order to prepare your future homeowners for ownership, because they may need a period of rental where they are not having to worry about the expenses of home ownership. and they are trying to save money in order to become homeowners in the future. They may need to repair their credit. Their credit may not be adequate. And so showing that they're stable renters over time helps them get into that home one day. So there's a push and pull between the two. You almost need the rental alongside the individual home ownership. You think of your rental stock as you're growing your future homeowners. But we'll also take a look at City of Winston-Salem data here in just a moment, and you'll see where the incomes are and how many of those folks might need rental versus home ownership. On that, I would just say, you've got other ways to create rental housing. You can, of course, support the LIHTC tax credit developments. Those are private development of housing. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you can also reserve your public land and make sure that it's used for multifamily rental. If you own city land that would be suitable for affordable housing, you could devote it to affordable housing. And if you do provide subsidies to developers of multifamily rental, just remember that 20% of the units need to be reserved for low-income people for 15 years. You can also support home ownership. This is a strategy. And again, that could be reserving public-owned land for affordable homes. You might zone differently. You might zone for small lots. And you might think about zoning for multifamily home ownership. So not just multifamily rental, but you might zone for multifamily home ownership opportunities, such as condominiums or duplexes or quadplexes. And if you do subsidize housing development for home ownership, just recall that the Constitution allows you to aid the poor. So you got to make sure that whatever subsidy goes into that housing eventually trickles down or flows into the low and moderate income buyer or renter. One final strategic point before I turn it over to Sarah is this distinction between asset building or ongoing affordability. This is a strategic decision that you all have to make as a council about where you want the emphasis. On the asset building side of the spectrum is where the assistance for housing actually results. First of all, that assistance for housing is not in the form of a loan. It's actually becomes part of the assets of the individual. And probably many of us in this meeting have taken advantage of one of the most important subsidies for housing, which is the traditional home ownership mortgage deduction. It doesn't come to us in the form of a loan. It's a write down off of our taxes. The federal government doesn't ask for that money back. So when 10 years from now, when I sell my house, the federal government doesn't try to take that mortgage deduction back. It becomes part of my assets. And I have built assets because it's not taken back. The problem with that is it depletes our assets as a city or as a federal government, right? So that money is gone. And so it stays with that homeowner instead of coming back to our coffers in order to provide housing for the next household. Down payment assistance works the same way. Look at the other side of the spectrum where you have ongoing affordability. Ongoing affordability is where you make sure that that housing is available year after year after year for the next low-income family. The problem with rental, of course, is that the people in rental, they're not gaining equity in their homes. They're not building assets for themselves. And so it's good for them as they start to build toward home ownership one day, but it's not going to build them assets. So one of the decisions you may have to make is where do you want to be on the spectrum? Which one do you want to be? Or a mix, but you want to do it intentionally. And there is a middle ground, something called shared equity. We say, if we're going to give you a loan, a down payment loan to help you with your house, then when you sell it 10 years from now, you get to keep some of the equity and we do. It's just like a business for those of you familiar with investing in businesses. So you get some equity, we get some equity. And then you take that, you get some of that capital back and you can use it for the next affordable home ownership program. That's a key strategy. Now we are going to talk about leveraging tax credits. And lucky for you, we have very limited time. And so you're going to get to go to that instead of me talking about the law. This is what happens when you ask a lawyer to make a small footnote about the law and affordable housing. I've given you that handout if you need a sleep aid, but we won't go over those. Major points are in the slides. Hopefully those slides will be distributed to you if they haven't already. Again, subsidy needs to be traced to the eligible low-income people. And the other major point is you have to help the poor. You don't have authority to aid market rate residential. And then that brings us back to our next portion of the agenda. Sarah, I'm going to stop sharing and so that you can.
Tyler, before we get into that, Councilor McIntosh had a quick question.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah, hey, Tyler, thanks. You always do a great job presenting. It's a pretty dense topic, but do a good job of getting it across. So I had asked the previous presenter if he had any sort of rule of thumb or thumbnail of what it takes for a local government on a per unit basis to actually subsidize or fill a gap to create, I mean, let's call it 80% AMI. I mean, it's all a moving target, but if we can just sort of drill down on that one.
Oh, this is a perfect segue into what Sarah is going to talk about now, because it depends. It's an excellent question that you've asked, but it depends on what the rents are in your community. It depends on what the costs of construction are in your community. And it depends on what 80% AMI actually is in the community. So Sarah's done a little bit of digging on it. It might be a perfect segue into her, and we can hold that question, talk to it at the end of hers, if that works for you.
Thank you.
All right.
I'll actually just dive into that pretty quickly in this presentation because it all comes down to the financing and the sources that are available. Funnily enough, I think sometimes you'll see units at 80% AMI that require more subsidy than at 60% AMI because of how they're subsidized. And so I'm sad Tyler didn't actually cover the legal part because that was really important for that point. So what I'm going to dive into is, he touched briefly on this, but the low-income housing tax credit program, it cannot be understated how important it is, right? It is one of the largest producers of affordable housing units across the country and private affordable units across the country. Now, before I get into that, though, I do want to talk about and kind of the primary things about what it comes down to with costs and how development is actually financed, right? So say you're building 80 units and it's going to cost you about 13 million. That would be very expensive. It was 30 million, 13 million to build it. On the one hand, if you choose to charge $650 per unit, you have an operating income. So after your expenses, you have an operating income of about $350,000. If you charge $1,500 in rent per unit, obviously your operating income is higher. Now, this is really important because how you size your loan depends on how much operating income you have to actually cover the debt service on that loan, right? Pretty basic concept. But where it gets complicated, and I think that where it's often misunderstood, is how the equity works in a deal. So for a market rate project with your units at $1,500 per unit, you can fill that gap with market rate equity because after you pay your debt service, there's still cash flow left. And so you've got investors that want to come in and they're going to make money off of this. When your rents are $650, you're not going to find an investor who's going to make much money off $45,000, right? Relative to, I don't know, where can you see my mouse here? Relative to the amount that they would need to put in. So for $1,500, they can put in $2.3 million and they're getting returns out of the $190,000 every year. With $650 rent, they're putting in, what is that? $8 million? And getting back $45,000 a year, maybe. They get a portion of it, right? And so there have to be alternate sources of equity. Mixing market rate and affordable doesn't typically work because they're different investors that are looking for different things. It's a different guy. It's a different woman. They're assessing these deals in different ways. And so you have to realize that when you're saying, hey, I want to mix market rate and affordable, you're talking about mixing sources of equity and debt that don't typically play together. Now, the low-income housing tax credit is a source of equity. It is a federal program. It provides tax credits for acquisition, rehab, or new construction of privately owned affordable rental units. So it's not used for home ownership at all. And it's awarded to private developers, never to a local government, right? And it contributes equity to a project that's serving low-income households with one of two rates. So there are two different programs. There's a 9% low-income housing tax credit program, and there's the 4% low-income housing tax credit program. Now, the bigger one is the one you'd expect, the 9, right? It's bigger than 4. And the 9 really comes down to about 90% of your capital costs could be covered in equity through this program. But it is highly competitive because you can imagine a lot of people want to cover 90% of their capital costs with this program. But there's a 4% tax credit, and the 4% tax credit covers about 40% of the capital costs, but it is automatic. Now, this program is administered by state agencies. So who you really have to know in North Carolina is the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. They're the boss. They make the rules. When I say 9% is competitive, they're the ones who set the scoring to make it competitive. And they say, this is more important to us as a state than this is. They also award the credits, and they monitor the development for a 30-year period of affordability. So while it could be 15 years, North Carolina actually dissuades developers from actually trying to exit at year 15. So typically these developments are 30 years. And in your community, you have probably seen these developments. They are really well maintained because of the agency that is monitoring these projects on an annual basis. Now, the challenge with using the low-income housing tax credit is that you can't just pick any old property that you want to use, right? Say you own a property, hey, that's the one we want to do LIHTC development on. You actually have to meet the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency's scoring system, right? Some examples include neighborhood characteristics. A really heavy one, as reflected in the map on the right, is access to amenities. So what you see on the right are pharmacies and grocery stores, and using their scoring system for access to those amenities, you can really only place LIHTC developments within the dark blue area and be competitive. Bus transit within walking distance, absence of incompatible uses. Often this can be the most frustrating for a lot of communities, but anything from a landfill wastewater treatment to a railroad within a certain number of feet. Visibility is critical, and introduced this year is actually walkability. So you have to have a high walk score. So as you can see, the program is definitely leaning more and more towards more urban areas like Winston-Salem by introducing a characteristic like this. But what it does is in any community, it really is starting to kind of cut down where you can really do LIHTC development. Now, let's compare. So we're going to assume we want those 650 rents, right? We want affordable rents. And you've got your loan. By the way, loan terms on an affordable project are much more attractive than on a market rate. So again, another reason why the mixing isn't all that awesome. And we get tax credit equity. So if we compete and you win the 9% LIHTC credit, you get $8 million in tax credit equity for your project, right? Now, if we don't have access to that 9% LIHTC equity, and we do a 4%, there is a gap. So now we're looking at a considerable gap. Now, if you want to do even deeper affordability, you're layering in more, right? You're dropping your income that's coming in. You have less ability to cover debt service, mouse, and your gap gets even bigger. So what ends up happening to make a 4% tax credit deal work is that developers need to look at other sources. And typically it's a local source that can really fill that gap. So home will go into this, CDBG funds will go into this, and sometimes local appropriations will go into this. But to make 4% work, if you look at the map across North Carolina of where they actually happen, it tends to be in more urban areas, in areas that have more funding to be able to address these gaps. Now, just to recap, I've already stated all of this, but the 4% just doesn't sound as attractive as the 9, right? But it's critical to understand that it's automatic. So this is 40% of your capital costs, right? The money that you can raise sitting there waiting for you to access if you have assistance from local government. So they don't have to compete, it's a guarantee. There are other key differences that are important in urban areas as well. And I'll point you to just the number of units that you can build. So you can get 200 units through a 4% LIHTC deal versus 120 at a time through a 9%.
And Sarah, that 120 units at a time is, I think, designed in part to make sure that the Housing Finance Agency can award these the more valuable credits across the state and not concentrate them. Is that right?
Yes. So looking at a case study. So I know you all are really interested in mixed income. So I've been sort of talking about how we can't just mix market rate and affordable. There are solutions to that. And we did this with Durham County. So Durham County had 2 county-owned surface parking lots in downtown Durham. They had plans just to build parking decks, right? There was desperate need for parking for employees. Durham County knows how to build parking, right? That's something that they've done before. But there were well-organized advocacy groups that are saying, hey, we need more housing and there isn't that much property left in downtown. And as that real estate goes up, you know, downtown Durham is getting $1 million condos in its one city center tower, right? And so affordable housing advocates were saying, hey, wait a second, there aren't that many opportunities for downtown affordable development anymore. We've got to do more here. And the county, as I said, you know, had experience with parking decks, but not affordable housing. And so DFI was brought in to help them figure out, okay, we still need the parking. Let's make sure we still get our parking, but how can we also bring in a private developer to build affordable housing? And guess what? We also want it to be mixed income. Mixed income is really important to us as a community, and mixed use. So how do we get all of these things that we want to see happen in our downtown? And so DFI worked with them on this. And what we came to was thinking about it as mixed income blocks with development teams. So coordinated development teams. So not picking one developer and picking another developer, and one does market rate and another does affordable, but that they work together as a team so that the 2 developments can have a similar look and feel, but they are financed completely separately so that the affordable can access that LIHTC financing and the market rate can go its traditional path, right? And importantly too, that the retail space could be incorporated into the market rate so that, again, you're not trying to mix this financing. And so we had development A, which was these market rate units, 25,000 square feet of commercial space, and development B. So between these 2 developments, 450 units. And what's great about the low-income housing tax credit program is that they've got something called income averaging. I won't get into it because it may be disappearing, but it did work for us in Durham. But the idea here is that we were able to also help the Durham Housing Authority. So the Durham Housing Authority is renovating and converting a lot of its units. And so this development is across the street and was able to take residents that would be ultimately displaced or needed to be relocated in some way, take project-based vouchers and apply them to this development as well. So between these 2 blocks, you had market rate, 80% AMI, 60% AMI, and 30% AMI, all served within the same block and within the same amenities and all of the benefits of being in downtown. Now, it did require quite a bit from Durham County to make this work, right? They didn't need to do anything and technically couldn't really do anything for the market rate component, but they did play an important role in terms of the land. So they sold the land for the market rate component, and then ground lease. So that was a $2.7 million sale for a portion of this property. And then we're able to ground lease the affordable portion of this to the developer at no cost to the development. And this was the tool that they chose to maintain that long-term affordability on the site and maintain that control. The county constructed the parking like they were always planning to do. And then they provided a loan to the project. And that was critical. And it's a 1.5% loan, repayable at sale with interest payments only over the year. Whether they get repaid for all of it is a risk that they're taking. And I'll say, we never guarantee that that the county will get repaid the loan that they put into this project. So I'm going to pause there if you have questions about that component, because from there, I'm going to dive into your housing needs. Okay. All right, here we go. So Tyler talked at length about cost burden and how that's an indicator. That's what we think of as a right. And so this is a map of the percent of renters that are spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs across North Carolina. And you can see here on the map that Forsyth County has a large percentage of its population, about 26%, that is severely cost burdened. If we dive into Forsyth County and Guilford next door, you can see in the dark here that Winston-Salem has an even higher proportion, right, of the rest of this region that is severely cost burdened. So when we compare Forsyth to the rest of the state, it is really Winston-Salem that's pushing that up. What we're looking here is the total households in need of assistance that have one of 4 severe housing problems. So this means that these households are either spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs, or they're living in substandard housing, meaning they don't have a kitchen, for example, or they are living 1.5 people per room. Okay, not bedroom, per room. So imagine that. And you can see here that without a doubt, the greatest need, whether renters or owners, are amongst your extremely low income households. So I don't think that surprises anybody. But this need is pretty great as you look at very low income households, low to moderate income households, even your moderate income households, but not at the same degree as these low income households in Winston-Salem alone. This is not Forsyth County, this is Winston-Salem. And so here is your area median income for a family of 4 of about $68,000. So what is affordable, right? What should people be spending on rents? I put it here as 2 to 3 people because your average household size is about 2.4, and I wanted to give you an idea of that range, right? But a household that is considered low income, 60% AMI, a couple can afford about $775, where maybe a couple and a child, or a parent and 2 children can afford up to $950. So that's not nothing, right? I think there's often this misconception that low income people can only pay, $200 and it's not viable. This is a good amount of rent that's expected. And the median rent in the area is actually about $800. And comparing that to a home value, right? This is assuming that someone can pay a 20% down payment. Now, that is a whole nother conversation. But you can see here that thinking about, the property values in your area, And whenever a listing goes up, how many people are competing for a property at 220 and below, right? The accessibility of renter is much greater, right, than what you would need to achieve and to enter homeownership. So in Winston-Salem, so what's important about what I'm showing you here is that it seems like, oh, okay, well, if our median is this point, it seems like it should serve all low-income people, right? The problem is that people don't always just live where they can afford. Often you'll have somebody who's earning, I don't know, maybe 60,000, and they say, hey, this apartment is 900. Remember, 60% AMI could be up to 950, right? And they're like, hey, I want to rent a 2-bedroom at 950. That looks good to me. And so what you end up having is this situation, right? Where you can't just pull people out of their houses and sort them to where everybody can afford. These are affordable rental units at each income bracket. So if you look at this, Winston-Salem has 25,000 units that are affordable for low to moderate income households. And what's great is that in that income bracket, right, you have, if you're looking at the low to moderate or you're looking at very low income, you have more affordable rental units at that income level than you do households. So you're like, why is there a problem here? If we add in the households with higher incomes that are actually living in these units, the number of households trying to compete for these 11,000 low income units exceeds that. Now, I don't want you to miss what is glaring in this, which is that extremely low income households, there just simply aren't enough that are affordable for them. And for the moderate income level, again, simply just not enough units. And so it's kind of the idea of you just need more at every income level, because you're having a lot of these households are putting pressure on the options available for low income and very low income households. Rents are on the rise in Winston-Salem. So the problem will only get greater, right, for low income households. And a big percentage of the subsidized affordable units in Winston-Salem are through the LIHTC program. But you also have a pretty robust public housing program, which is not private like LIHTC is. It all publicly funded, and Section 8 as well. But these developments, these LIHTC units are expiring. So over the next 10 years, you're going to lose about 1,000 affordable units in Winston-Salem. Now, reminder of what Tyler was talking about. There are a lot of options for how you can intervene as a city. You can think about providing ongoing affordability options. You can think about wealth building, focus on wealth building. It's also thinking about, what about those 1,000 units that are about to disappear? Can we preserve those? How do we preserve those and build new? So as you lose units, make sure that you're not losing more than you build, right? And so what I say to everyone is that the most important thing that you can, it's so hard, right? There's just so much stuff between what Tyler just told you, what I just told you. There's so many things to think about. And the focus really needs to be on prioritizing, because at the end of the day, you need it all. You need homeownership options. You also need rental options, and you need ELI. You also need moderate income. You need to do it all, but your resources are limited. Your resources are limited. So you need to sit down and say, hey, what are our priorities today? What are our interests? Who do you want to target? Seniors, families, extremely low income, low, moderate income. Do you want it to be rental, home ownership? Is this a citywide effort, or do you want to focus your efforts on a neighborhood? What are your resources that are actually available to devote to this issue? You don't have to answer this now, obviously. These are kind of guiding questions for the future. And keep in mind, that multiple interests can be met. You could do more than one, right? But how do you eat an elephant? one bite at a time. But you'll never get anywhere. So you got to eat more than one bite, but still start with that one bite. But you're going to have trade-offs. There will be trade-offs because if you're focusing on ELI, extremely low income households, you're going to invest a lot more. So your resources are limited on that end. And thinking about the sites that you have available as a city, the properties that you own, they can really dictate what type of development can happen. And so getting a sense of, hey, so we do have these properties. This is our resource, right? Our properties are our resources. Maybe we don't have a huge pot of money, but we have these properties. What can you do with those can actually help you define your public interests. So the end. Any questions?
Questions of Sarah? That's a lot. That's like taking a big drink of a fire hose.
I
Sarah.
know.
Really good stuff, though. Really good. Really good. I love the charts that laid out the return on investment for investors and so on. It's done very well. Let's see. Councilmember Monday and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had thrown some questions into the chat box to Tyler, and Tyler, you decide if now is the right time to address some of these, or if you want, if they're going to be worked in at a later time.
No, this is it, Councilman Mundy. This is the time to ask them.
Okay. I had asked earlier about the 9% tax credit, whether it was evenly distributed across all municipalities or if they were awarded irrespective of location. And Tyler answered that they were, they try to award at least one project per county per year, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I know of at least one project that's been trying to get that 9% for several years, and it hasn't worked out for them yet.
You all are competing. Sorry, I'd like to add to that is that you all are competing within the metro category. So there's a specific set aside for metros. So a metro can actually get more than one project because of kind of the need that's assessed. And I believe Winston-Salem gets like a 20% of the total metro allocation. So you could get more than one project a year.
So there is a formula that they use to try to make sure that it is evenly distributed and one municipality doesn't take all that entire pot. It sounds like. Okay. And right at the end, you know, one of the questions is, do we decide to focus on rental or home ownership? And you know, I've heard a difference of opinion on the council, just among 8 people. What criteria do we use to make this decision? Should we use?
Yeah, when I think about that question, I think about what your resources are, and I think about where your need is. And so Sarah showed the various needs at different income levels. And if you want to help those at the lower income spectrum, home ownership is just not going to be an option for them. They're not going to be able to get the down payment together, and they're not going to be able to afford the housing cost for a home ownership option. And so if you want to address the need at that lower income range, you're likely going to have to resort to rental. But if you are also trying to give folks opportunities to do wealth building and you have the ability to, you've got developers who want to make affordable home ownership options, and if you need housing at the 80 to 100% AMI level, then that might be an effective strategy, but you're just not going to you're not going to serve the lower income folks.
And I'll say, if you have a property, right? So again, your resources are not just cash that you can put into a project. It's also the properties that you all own. And so if you have a property that is appropriate for single family, more so than it is for multifamily, for whatever reason, then you think about that site relative to that priority. So thinking about your resources as a whole.
And then the last question I had, and I'll stop so somebody else can ask, is, and I probably should know this, but I don't. The North Carolina Constitution says we can help the poor. How is poor defined? Who defines it? And is it the same? Is it set at a statewide level, per market, or at the federal level?
It's a great question. It is set by statute. and it is defined as persons of low income, and that is 60% of the area median income. And the specific definition is the local area median family income as defined by the most recent figures published by HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So HUD tells you what your area median incomes are. They'll even calculate for you what 60% is, and that is the income level that is low income in the state, 60% of area median income. Moderate income is a little more squishy. Moderate income is defined as several factors, but one of the important factors is eligibility for federal housing assistance. And so it's too complicated to go into a full analysis of what moderate income means, but I can say that the max that most federal housing programs will subsidize is 80% area median income. So I often have the opinion that I think it's reasonable to call moderate income 80% of area median income or below, because there are federal programs that will allow you to go all the way up to 80% area median income. But I haven't seen programs that make sense to go above that. There are other factors too, which is, the amount of the costs in your local community. And so we'd have to look at those factors, but I think 80% is a fair number to use as a rough figure.
Thank you, Tyler. Pro Tem?
Yes, thank you. Tyler, would you say, and Sarah, that the best strategy is to have more than one strategy, that maybe you have a 2 or 3 pronged strategy, in that we know that a lot of younger people, older people can't afford to buy a house based on their income. It's not to say they don't want to buy one, but they got to get in, at least have somewhere to live. Okay, that's where you build those multifamily units, apartments, duplexes, quads, whatever. Again, working with wraparound resources in the community, like give them a turnkey package that we will help you work on your credit, save money, blah, blah, blah. Because, do you have an expectation of how long you want to be here if you want to buy a house? They might say 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years, we're building also houses over here, single residential structures, zone R9, that people can move into and own if they choose at a below average medium income. Is it possible, and I'm sure there are other cities that are doing this multifaceted thing, besides thinking, because most of the people that need, well, they all need low income and extremely low income. And then you got this other spectrum of the moderate income, that they are also closing out the rents or the units for the low and extremely low, because they're moving into them because they can afford them and also they can save. So what do you think about that, Tyler and Sarah?
Sarah, you want to give that a shot?
I mean, I think that yes, having, 3 priorities and 3 strategies works, right? But I remind you that your resources are always going to be limited. And so I would make sure that you are really kind of setting what those priorities are in terms of what you can do sooner than later and what the pressing things are. And I think you speak a lot of truth, in terms of, you do want to think about that moderate income level because of the pressure that they're putting on the low income. And it goes back to the homeownership question, which is those are households that should be able to own a home, but they're getting closed out of the ownership sector because housing is so expensive for them as well. And so they're renting those apartments out from under people. And so that is important as well as preservation. Sorry, Tyler, preservation, because if you're not preserving what is already affordable, you're basically just,
spinning a wheel.
We're like a hamster. We're on a spinning wheel.
And it's not just your resources, it's also the resources that are made available to you. That's why the low-income housing tax credit is so important, because it's where you can leverage what you've got. So you might choose with your limited resources to take advantage of the leverage opportunity the federal government provides, but that puts you into the rental category and it puts you at 60% area median income. Doesn't address that home ownership model that you're talking about.
Thank you. Councilor McIntosh, quick question.
Yeah, just quickly on the 4% versus 9% LIHTC money. Am I right in, from what I heard, if we decide to partner with a developer on a 4% project, we're not bound by the same matrix points that 9% developers are? Because there's some kind of unintended consequences with the 9% money. I mean, you end up pushing people out, and areas that really need to have investment are excluded from it. So it seems to me like that's an opportunity.
You're bound by a threshold of 45, right? Is the points you have to have compared to 60 points. So there's a big difference there. There's quite a bit of leeway if you do a 4% deal in terms of where it can be located, thinking about neighborhoods, for example.
But on the other hand, I think we had 10 projects in Forsyth County last year that scored 100 and couldn't get 9% money. So the 4% money is there. We just have to be a little more creative with how we put it together.
Thank you. Councilor Larson, you had a quick question? You're muted, John.
Thank you, sir. Quick sort of observation. We're getting ready to apply multi-million dollars, $20 million perhaps, as an effort to do transformative impact on housing in Winston-Salem. And well, I guess what I'm having my problem getting my arms around is there are a bunch of programs that are already in place with GBDs and home programs, federal programs that are also throwing money into the pot. And I guess at some point, maybe our staff or somebody can help me understand a little better what is feeding the housing trough in Winston-Salem. And so as we begin to think about how we're going to apply these additional funds, which are going to be a one-time allocation to, and based on what is already being made available at the federal or maybe state or local levels with bonds that we've already approved. And I'm just trying to understand what the pot is that we're trying to allocate here. And then as we look at whether it's going to be rental or home ownership or a variety of things that we're going to have to decide on, I'd like to try to understand a little better. If staff could help me do that, I would appreciate it.
Right. We certainly do that. Thank you, John. Well, we're at a break time right now at 6:15. So let's come back at 6:20, and then we will move into next step. Again, Tyler and Sarah, thank you so much. Great presentation. Very, very helpful. Help give us a really good background to move forward as always. Glad to have you all in state of North Carolina helping us cities.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Council members, I have, my watch says it's time. So if everybody's ready, we'll jump into the next segment, which is the final segment. Marla is going to begin discussing next steps, implementation strategy, and so on. So Marla, if you'd take about 10 or 15 minutes and walk us through that, please go forward.
Yes, sir. I'll pull up my PowerPoint presentation. Please let me know what you see on your screen. You see the presenter mode or the full screen?
We're still in gallery.
Yeah, I don't see anything on it.
Okay. Okay, hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. Let me come out and try to hit it again. Let's see here. Let's share screen. Let's see. Multiple participants can share. We'll try it again. This would be tragic. Anything yet? Are you able to see? Interesting. Sorry about that. We'll try that one more time. Otherwise, I'll just have to talk you through it.
We see you very well. You're looking good.
Definitely not the goal here. Let me try this one more time.
If it doesn't work, can you email it to somebody and let them share it or whatever?
Okay.
Miss Newman, you can email it to the clerk's office and we'll share our screen.
All right, we will do that. I apologize. That's
Dee Dee's eating the Chick-fil-A sandwich, I see.
All right. That one.
I have a soda.
All right.
While we wait, can I just say that our city manager looks a lot more healthy than the last time I saw him on Zoom?
And I'll just say thank you. I'm drinking my Wake Forest weight loss shake.
All right.
Lee, while we're waiting, could you please get me the average salary for a police officer in Winston-Salem, including overtime, whatever we do, right off the W-2s?
All right.
All officers. You can exclude the chief, I guess. I thought the number he presented was low.
Yeah, our starting, that's low. I mean, our starting salary, once you get out of school, is like 41 or just under 40.
And, so, and that's the youngest guy.
That's probably counting everybody and a few years old. I'll get you a number.
I appreciate it.
If you look behind tab 4, you have a couple of pages that at the top say paycheck to paycheck. And on the third page, it lists salaries for police and sheriff's patrol officers for Winston-Salem. So that could give you a little bit of an idea in the short term. So it shows what's needed for rental as well as what's needed for home ownership. Okay. So we'll just wait for the clerk and it should be up shortly.
Is there anything you can talk to us about while we wait?
Absolutely. So basically, when I talk about next steps, I'm going to be looking at 4 primary areas. The first will be development implementation strategy. There we go. So we can go to the next slide. So the development implementation strategy, which Mitchell Silver talked a little bit about, then the funding and financing opportunities, private sector involvement, and their near-term action or opportunities. Next slide. Under the development implementation strategy, of course, we've talked a little bit in the beginning about the Legacy 2030 plan. That's the next slide, please. The Legacy 2030 plan, the fact that this is the year to update that plan, the idea to include an implementation segment to that would then complement with number 2 below, where staff has been proposing in concert with the Affordable Housing Coalition that we actually develop a 10-year housing strategy. And in that strategy, we would actually set annual goals for preservation and new housing construction. That plan could also look at proposed investments to support those production goals. And then it would identify key stakeholders and responsibilities and accountability to make sure that these production goals are achieved. And it's similar to what Mitch Silver talked about the plan in Raleigh, where there was a plan, everyone knew their part, everyone had to be accountable to their part of implementing the plan. And you'll see here, I noted the Affordable Housing Coalition and our department would be key for the 10-year housing strategy, in concert with the Planning and Development Services Department with the Legacy 2030 update. So we would work in tandem with one another. Next slide. When we think about funding or financing opportunities, of course, we know we have funding available through the American Rescue Plan Act. There is some funding available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. When we look at either new construction or preservation, you'll have to do infrastructure. With new construction, it's laying some of the new lines that you'll need, roads, curbs, gutters, and the like. But even with preservation, sometimes we have to replace aging infrastructure. And we know that for a city of our age, that we do have aging infrastructure, and this would be the time to utilize these funds to upgrade that infrastructure as we're preserving and upgrading our housing. Certainly, you know, the possibility of a housing bond in 2024 is something to be considered. We've done a bond in 2014, we've done one in 2018. It may be time to think of that as a potential financing opportunity. Certainly looking for below market private investment from corporate foundations, philanthropy. The banks have Community Reinvestment Act obligations and others. So looking at a variety of sources that could put funds to use to help us meet the goals that we would have to develop and preserve housing. And then ultimately, another consideration would be creating our own local housing trust fund. And it could be a vehicle by which the items in numbers 1 through 4, that's where that money could park, find some entity that could actually manage those funds. And this is similar to what is taking place currently in Charlotte. They have essentially a housing trust fund, and that particular fund is managed by the Local Initiative Support Corporation, commonly referred to as LISC. But it was a combination of city financing, philanthropy, corporate investments, and the like, and they're using this as one vehicle for providing more affordable housing. Next slide. So you see here, I have private sector involvement, and to some extent, this kind of touches on what I mentioned in slide number 4 around some of the sources of funding. Clearly, we can't do this alone. And so when we look at how we can work in concert with some other stakeholders who also have a vested interest in affordable housing, we can look at some of those who are in this community, from manufacturing to healthcare, education, hospitality, and tourism. So there are a number of resources that we have in the community who I believe, and I'm sure you will agree, have an interest in affordable and accessible and quality homes for all of our residents. And I think it's important, a lot of times we talk about creating new housing and new opportunities, but we have to also be mindful of our existing residents because we, I think, have made a commitment to livable neighborhoods, and that's for everyone. And so we want to make sure that as we look at the new, that again, we do preservation, we do look at existing homeowners and those who are even current renters in our community who may need a decent or better place to live, because right now they may not be in the best of living circumstances. So next we talk about near-term opportunities and actions. So in the next 60 to 180 days, we actually have a number of items that we could look at pursuing that get us on the path to development. You start with the Ridgewood subdivision. Staff has been working on an RFP, are at a point of being close to deciding on different housing plans, and look at being able to probably go out with an RFP for developers in April of this year. The Northwest Boulevard Permanent Supportive Housing, We are waiting on the results of the environmental analysis with the hope that we would have that sometime in the near term and have the opportunity to go back to the neighborhood, the Boston Thurman neighborhood, with the results of that environmental analysis. Being hopeful and optimistic, we would think that the neighborhood would support moving forward. And if that is the case, we would like to look at moving forward with that by July of this year. The Peters Creek mixed income home ownership, that's the 5.33 acres that you all approved us purchasing this past fall. That sale, or rather the purchase of that, should be complete within the next couple of weeks. And with that in mind, we would be ready to move forward with doing some initial planning and hopefully starting the process of getting an RFP ready in May of this year. And then when you see acquisition rehab of motel or small apartment complex, we know that some of the funds that we have, some of the leftover CARES Act funds, as well as the home ARP dollars, can be used for acquisition and rehab. Especially when we look at what has happened in Greensboro, Charlotte, and some other communities where they have actually acquired some existing facility, upgraded it, and used it, especially for permanent supportive housing to help persons transition who have been experiencing homelessness. And then one other potential opportunity to revisit is the Delta Vision site. That property is still sitting. We do have a lien on that property. We are in co-first position with the former North Carolina Community Development Initiative. They are not interested in developing that particular parcel. It's a great opportunity for the city. It's 34 acres in the heart of town. It can be a planned unit development where you could have a mix of ownership, rental, and other amenities on the site. So certainly it is something that staff is recommending that we take a look at going forward, and certainly within the next 180 days. The next near-term opportunity is around our policies. So we have the Affordable Housing Ordinance and the Housing Justice Act, which have been previewed for you as an information item by the City Attorney's Office previously. Then we also have land banking. And of course, the School of Government has mentioned land banking this evening. We have also been in conversation with the School of Government with the Development Finance Initiative to look at potential technical assistance in helping us put together the mechanics of the land bank. We have actually also been in conversation with them about providing us with some of the initial technical assistance to pursue those development projects that were outlined on the previous slide and potentially get us to the point where we can be ready to issue requests for proposals for those various developments that I outlined that could be ready to go forward within the next 180 days. So those are some of the near-term opportunities to be considered as potential next steps, and certainly any additional policies that you all think are helpful to move us along in pursuing this as one of our top strategic priorities.
Yeah, thank you, Marla. Just a couple quick reactions from my part. You mentioned a bond issue in 2024. I would recommend that we not have a bond issue on the same year as we're having our municipal elections. That usually doesn't work out too well. So I would say maybe we should think about a 2023 kind of a potential bond vote there in terms of just thinking the most viable one. Also, Charlotte, you mentioned Charlotte Local Housing Trust Fund. I've had conversations with a number of the investors there, which one of the biggest ones has been Atrium, and they structured theirs so that it is an investment, that there is an ability for some return on investment for these investors. And I think that's a key to it as we go forward. Council members, what we want to try to do is wind up here with a direction. I'll come back to you in March, but I would just open it up for any general thoughts, discussion, questions, or as we at this point. Hang on just a second. Councilmember Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question to Marla. Where do the housing, where do the empty lots that we currently own, the 300 something or 200 something buildable lots that were identified, within our work program of using that property to increase our affordable housing? How are we now programming that into our work program?
Right now, I think one of the things that we're needing to do is revisit the affordable housing ordinance, because I think that's included as part of that, how those properties will be utilized, whether internally or if they will be put out to the public for use for development. And I think that some of this refers back to the conversation we had earlier with the presenters about what makes the most sense for us to actually keep in our inventory and develop at some point, maybe when housing prices change, or are some of the parcels more appropriate for transfer on the market. So I think we have some determination to make about which ones make the most sense because of their location, their access to transportation, services, and the like. So I think there's another level of analysis that needs to take place, especially because they are single lots, making them more suitable for single family development rather than multifamily, where we see the greatest need being. So I think it does get into some conversation around what are our priorities from a development standpoint. Will it be single family? Will it be multifamily? Are we going to do a combination? And I think depending on what council decides is the priority, or where we start with the development, then that kind of helps tell us as staff what we should do as it relates to those individual parcels that the city owns throughout the city.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh?
Yeah, I'm really interested in seeing what the form of a housing trust fund would look like. For me to support that, and I think that's the way for us to go, I would like to see it structured where the city does not put itself in the position of being a developer on any of these projects. We would be a financing partner, but we should not put ourselves in a position of choosing the best thing to build or acting like a developer. It's a very difficult business. A lot of people fail at it, and I think we've got plenty of professionals in the community that we can count on to do that work for us. I would like to see some effort made towards a program to assist in purchase of packages of single family homes. I mean, the whole foreclosure issue, there's a lot of information in the book. I want to see us go down that path to try to make some properties available for people to buy to rehab. I mean, that's low hanging fruit. That's less expensive than building new from the ground. And by the numbers that we see in here, there's a lot of that out there. And I think that can be brought back onto line more quickly than some of these large projects that we're looking at. And Marlene, you and I have talked about this before, but seeing some structure around that as part of this bigger program would be great.
Good point, council members. And I think in Charlotte, they used a lot of their local housing trust fund to purchase old motels, as Marla has mentioned, or some housing units that are in bad shape to preserve them and bring them back online. Let's see, Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, just real quickly. First off, it would be helpful if we had a feeling for how much money we actually had. We mentioned some of the sources, but at least the money that we control, if we can put some numbers on a piece of paper so we have. Number two, just to reiterate kind of what Jeff said, I would like to take a look at the properties we own / the ones that were mentioned in the booklet that were 5 years or more in arrears on taxes, that have a building on them, not vacant land, but a building, to see if they're rehabitable. Thirdly, the projects, Ms. Newman, that you just mentioned, I think it would be helpful to get a little more information on those. Those sounded very promising.
Which ones?
And fourthly, I'll just make the comment.
I'm sorry to hear which ones?
The ones you mentioned, the 4 or 5 you mentioned up there,
okay.
The one on Peters Creek and Delta Point or whatever it was. The other one, I would, Delta Visions, whatever it was, I would be very cautious of the 380 lots or whatever we own. The vacant ones, I think, are almost worthless. To build a single family house by itself is expensive, and I don't see a lot of future there. There's a reason we've owned them since the beginning of time, and that's because nobody wants them. we can look through the ones we own to see if they're any big enough maybe to put some small multifamily on. But as I mentioned in my comments earlier, if you may have to subsidize 50% of the cost of a single family house to cover the difference in what it would cost to build a house and what it's going to be worth when we finish it. And that may not be the best use of our funds. But all in all, I thought all the presentations were great, including yours, Ms. Newman. And I think you've got some good steps in there to develop an action plan.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Councilmember Scipio.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for this summit today. It's been very, and the book was great to see all of the research we gathered and see it all together on housing. I'm very, very concerned about our qualified census tracts in that whatever we do, that we try to mitigate the effects that's happened over 100 years in those areas. It's not just about building houses. There are some fine structures in those census tracts, but low-income people just don't have all the money they need to rehab them. We've got maintenance issues. I really would very much like for us to survey that qualified census tracts and examine those houses. I know one of the reports talked about that in the Forever Home. Look at what could be rehabbed. What is the actual number? There are some fine homes in some of those tracts, and I don't want us to forget those, because those are homes that people either live in or they're investor properties, that's a whole nother section. But I think preservation of what we already have might indicate that we have units that people could afford if we could get them back on the market. So I'm very, very adamant about that. I'm also very sensitive about not assisting people in creating their wealth in home ownerships and helping them get there. And if we think differently about it, we can help them get in a home that they can maintain at a certain level, but that's an educational thing. Just to write it off, I think it's a misstep for us, that we should be very, very concerned about creating wealth, particularly in our qualified census tracts where the income is low. Because the income is low, I think we also need to be thinking about how do we increase the incomes of people in those qualified census tracts. It's not necessarily by building houses, but it's something we've got to do to get them into better jobs so they can have greater income. Because part of what we're thinking, one of the assumptions about all of this is low-income people will never get up better. So let's just continue to make it affordable for them to have something where they can live that's nice. But we need to think about shifting that income of these people in that qualified census tract. So we have higher income people and the people who are there now. If they're young, get them into better jobs. But that's a whole different tactic we have to do. And I hope the next step is that we will all come together with an overall plan of what we're going to do strategically among everything. New homes where we're going to do infill. I'm very interested in that, looking at the properties that are losing their subsidies through the low income housing. If there are some units there, I would like to see the list of those that are coming available over the next 10, 12, 15 years so we can see if there's somewhere there we need to invest right now to get ready for that. And I guess I'm hopeful that we're not looking at whatever we're doing without seeing how that $20 million that we've sort of set aside for ARPA funds fits into all of this. I wasn't real clear how all of that, does this play into that? so that we will then have a plan on how to spend that dollars. Is that the ultimate goal?
Yeah, I'll comment just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
I just want, again, everyone to understand that I know some people, get anxiety about movement and change and action. We want action, but we never seem to move off the dime of doing anything. We talk a lot, we do studies, we involve the community. But at the end of the day, we're the ones responsible to make it happen. And as we've learned today, whether we divide it up into 3 prongs or 4 prongs, we can work on preservation. That was part of, if Marla remembers, and Aaron, the For Everyone Home deal. Preservation, production, that's 1 prong. We can also work on the affordable, low income, and extremely low income part, knowing that they got to have somewhere to live. And if they don't have somewhere to live, just like the young people, they're going to leave. They're going to leave. And then when we're sitting around trying to figure out how to pay for all of the services, the last thing I know, a lot of us get indigestion over high taxes. But if you don't start to do something, and you've all heard me say, people like to see something. When you say you're going to do something, you can't just plan. You got to plan to do something. And you don't have to do it all at once. Like we said, you don't have to take the big bite, but we got to do something, whether it's work on any of those projects that were listed, whether we decide again, we're going to take a 3 to 4 prong initiative to get something done. But the decision to be indecisive and do nothing and talk for another year is not going to cut it, because we're already 16,000. We're losing the units. We knew about it years ago. Market rate and the housing market crash caused rental unit affordability to almost go out the window. That our 30 years or 20 years that we put on it or imposed upon the units, they're going away. So now we got to build units just to replace those units. But again, Mayor and members of the council, I hope that we leave this work session with our heads to the grindstone, knowing that we got to do something.
Thank you. Councilmember Burke.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. This has been a very enlightening workshop so far. I just want to add that we do have to do something, and now is the time. I want to echo what Councilmember Scipio has said, as well as Mayor Pro Tem Adams. We need to make sure that when we move forward, that we're creating opportunities for incomes to grow among the people where they are the lowest. We want to make sure that we are working on goals and initiatives where we are preserving our housing stock where we can. I just ask that we think about, as we move forward, so many disparities that we have in the Northeast Ward, in the East Ward. We have health disparities, we have food disparities, we have mental illness disparities. And as we create new housing opportunities, let's remember that where we build new housing and who we build new housing for can add to the disparities, or it can help to minimize the ones that we have. Since I've been on council, I have just been working diligently to try to get a grocery store in the Northeast Ward, where there is a food desert, where many people have to walk a long way just to get to a grocery store. Walk. Where many people rely on the Dollar General for their groceries. And we all know that that is not a healthy way to live and provide food for your families. We're talking about a lot of processed foods. When we create housing this time, we need to think about reversing these issues, changing these issues as we move forward. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Councilmember Burke. Councilmember Mundy had a comment.
Exactly what Councilmember Burke said. We really need to look. Housing is just one component, and probably the most important component, because you have to have a roof over your head before you can do anything else. But we have to do this in concert with economic development, with identifying who needs help to get a better job. If they had a higher income, they could afford the housing that they're in. And it's also a matter of making those neighborhoods more attractive, more viable, and putting them in a position that the property values can raise, could come up. And I don't think we can get them to the level that they were, but we can certainly, with the things that we do, with incentives that we provide to get retail there. I know that we can't spend public dollars on private development, but that it seems like there should be some incentives to get a grocery store, because that is in fact helping the poor. So I just want us to look at more than just housing as we put this plan together. What else can we do?
Thank you very much, council members. Let me see if I can bring us home. We've had a long work session here. Again, thank Marla and Ms. Tony for your hard work in putting together this workshop. It's been very, very helpful. We've seen a very detailed analysis of the issues that are facing us relative to meeting this goal of almost 15,000 units. It sounds like it's getting closer to 16 if we're going to lose 1,000 expiring credits. We've learned a lot about tools and strategies. And so what I would like to ask that you consider is that we recommit our efforts to, and the financial resources necessary to ensure that we meet our goal and our need. I think we got to be, as Mayor Pro Tem said, we got to be laser focused on getting this done. So therefore, I would ask this. I'd ask the staff to bring an action item to the City Council next month that would, one, commit that $20 million in our American Rescue Plan funds to affordable housing. It can be used in a number of ways as we develop the plan. Commit the $10 million that we got from the state, again, for housing that was pretty well earmarked. And then finally, to establish a formal goal of at least 750 affordable units per year going forward. Now, we said that won't get us there totally, but it'll get us, as Mayor Pro Tem said, give us something to shoot for, something we can measure, something we can go for each year and look at our dashboard on that. So, Mr. Manager, I would ask that you work with staff and bring some action item to the council in March so that we can begin really trying to put some horsepower behind this key problem here. So, council members, if all hearts and minds are good, I would entertain a motion to end this committee of the whole.
So moved.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor of adjourning the committee of the whole, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to ending this committee of the whole meeting, say no. Sounds like everybody's in favor of it. Have a great evening.